Greetings. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks, Sr., your host, and this is Community Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a unique program. Tonight we have four exemplary people here and from all over the country. We have first of all, we have co-host Denise Rotheimer. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks.
This is the first time you've been a co-host. You've been on Community Forum several times, propagating information that Lake County should know. Now, in addition to your program, which you're going to hear in a few minutes, along with the other guests, we have to your left, we have Vicky Henry, and Vicky is the president and founder of Women Against the Registry. And Vicky, as I just learned, she's from St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome. Next to her, we have Betsy Clark, president and founder of Juvenile Justice Initiative, and she's a little closer. She's from Evanston, Illinois. Welcome. And our anchor person is Veronica Williams. She's the CEO of Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions.
Thank you.
And we're going to have her husband, Keith Williams, come in, and later on, he's the vice president of Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions. Why don't we start off by telling our listening audience a little bit about your personal and professional background. Why don't we start with Denise?
Well, first, again, I appreciate, Dr. Brooks, all your work in the community and the great diversity that you always promote in your programs in the community. Going back to my beginnings of why I'm involved in this work, I've authored 2 state laws that passed unanimously. Jasmine's Law, double sentencing for child sex offenders by making alcohol an aggravating factor. It's at the discretion of the judge to impose the sentencing on all 5 class felonies. And then the victim rights sign-off sheet, which also passed unanimously, informs victims of their rights at the onset of the criminal legal process within 48 hours of reporting an offense. And my third bill that I'm working on, and I was just with the senator this evening before coming here to the show, I want to provide legal representation to victims of crime at no cost to the crime victim to enforce their rights during the criminal legal process. So again, I appreciate this discussion and also engaging with the other guest here today on this very exciting topic, talking about the system.
It's like a coalition, see, of 4 different groups. Vicky Henry, you're president and founder of Women Against the Registry, and Registry, you'll be discussing issues surrounding sex offender registration and restrictions and harm it does to individuals and their families. You want to give us a little background?
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and it's going to be a very interesting discussion, and I enjoy, discussing our situation, our topic. I retired from the phone company, 25 years, and our family was brought into this unfortunate arena in 2007. I became an advocate in 2009, and then Women Against Registry was organized in 2011 at another advocacy conference when we determined there was enough women that were tired of the way that things were going and wanted to stand up for our families and what's happening to us, and that we believe that all children have the right to not worry about their safety, all children. And so we just want to educate legislators, educate the public, those kind of things.
Be a little bit more specific. You say tired of the things that were going. What do you mean by tired of things that?
Well, when we advocate against a public sex offender registry, and the reason we do that is because we call a public sex offender registry a hit list. Because if I'm a registrant and all of you live at my residence, then you're on the registry too. And we've had people open the door and get shot. We've had all kinds of things happened to people because their address was out there in public. Their house got burned, that kind of thing. And so, you know, we think it's time that legislators and others know what's happening by all the laws and the restrictions and the ex post facto part of it.
Now, Lake County, Illinois is approximately 750,000 people. We don't know what percentage of that population agrees with you, but we're going to get into that as we go along, you know. But right now, we're going to let Betsy Clark. She's not from Lake County, she's from Cook County. I guess that's Evanston, right?
Well, yes, I guess, yeah. I'm on the border there. Yeah.
Yeah, you are the president and founder of Juvenile Justice Initiative, and you're going to be talking to us about the issues of the legal representation of our youth.
Yes, and the Juvenile Justice Initiative is set up to do policy advocacy across the state to ensure that we have individualized and proportionate justice for all of our children. So we look at right-sizing our justice system, making sure children are tried in juvenile court. Illinois is the home of the world's first juvenile court. So all of our children, rather than trying them as adults, keeping them in juvenile court, and then making sure that they're treated fairly, making sure that incarceration is used as a last resort and for as short a time as possible, and really sensible laws. And we find the research shows that children, when they're treated in community settings rather than incarcerated, rather than cookie cutter responses like registries and mandatory sentences, are much more likely to be able to rehabilitate and become, you know, second chances, become good citizens. So it's in all of our best interest to have individualized and proportionate justice.
Well, the anchor a part of our team is Veronica Williams. And Veronica, you the CEO, Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions. Just a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with this group.
Well, thank you for inviting me here and of all of our conversations. I appreciate the invite, and I appreciate all of my guests that are here for coming and participating. I've been in the healthcare industry for over 20 years and worked as a claim representative for a number of HMO companies. I recently was with the Cancer Treatment Centers of America. I got involved with this, as Vicky Henry has stated, because of my own personal interest and because of my family being involved in the judicial system starting in 2014. And when I talk about how the judicial system and how it fails us in terms of giving us what we need to know to help our children, in all fairness, it doesn't happen. We're promised this, we're promised that, and it doesn't happen. Therefore, when you're sitting with your hands tied, you cannot reasonably make an intelligent decision because you just don't know. And that's where legal representation comes in. And when I say our children are incarcerated at high numbers, which is unfair, especially upon our black youth, our Hispanic, and then our Caucasians as well, the numbers are just, it's ridiculous. And especially for nonviolent crimes. Now, we're not saying that nonviolent crimes shouldn't be addressed, because they definitely should be, but it should be fair, and it should be the very system that is incarcerating us, or that is supposed to protect us, is the very system that's penalizing us at an alarming rate that it just needs to stop. And so my involvement is to create an awareness, to create education, and to create fairness, and let our communities and our families know that this is what needs to be done. And stepping up and speaking out about these things is what's going to hopefully create a forum so that we can come together in a way to magnify this issue so that our kids have a chance at becoming citizens that are productive, and not to annihilate them from their right to be productive.
How are you marketing your group so people know about it?
Well, I'm creating awareness by putting together programs with our youth, being involved with our church, being involved with prison ministries, because prison ministry plays a great a part in this, because we actually go into the juvenile system. We actually go into the juvenile system in, where is it, Vernon Hills, actually, and we do administer to those juveniles. And we see them, and we see where they're at, and they say either they didn't mean it or they're sorry, and how can we make it right? They are crying out for help, and a lot of these children are coming from disproportionate families, situations that they couldn't help, situations where their mothers or fathers were not able to help them, and so they couldn't get the help, and they're seeking the help, but they are failed the help because they are socioeconomically underdeveloped or don't have the education to provide them with the means to an end. So socioeconomically, they're deprived.
Earlier you had mentioned about there's certain groups of children that have more difficulty than others, that the prison system is majority of because they don't have the support of the legal representation and so forth. But what about public defender's office? Have you had success with the public defender's office?
Not really, because you do have some good public defenders out there, but they're either overworked, underworked, or understaffed, and so they cannot address your case in a manner that would be pleasing, or I should say well-informed to their client. So therefore, you're still at a loss, because they're trying to work your case, and at the same time, their caseload is piled high. So they really can't give your case the time and the attention that it needs, because they're overworked. So the success rate there, I'm not saying that it can't be done, but it's lacking, because they don't have sometimes they're just not there for you, because they're overworked, and the caseloads, they can't get to your case and give you the time that you need to make you aware and fully equipped with the information, because they are overworked, and they'll call you back. Well, something comes up, you're in the courtroom, you get, say, the extensions on top of extensions on top of extensions, and then your case gets buried in the pile. So, it's a long, never-ending story.
And it's too late.
Yes.
The point is that in this country, we appoint counsel when children go to trial.
Okay.
But we don't appoint counsel when children are at the police station being questioned about the case. And this is very different from Europe, for example, which has said under human rights law, children and adults have a right to counsel at the station house during interrogation. So children in Illinois are routinely questioned. The only statutory requirement is to notify parents that they've been arrested and where they're being held. There's no requirement that parents be present or any interested adult. No legal requirement. Police are allowed to misrepresent to children, and the Illinois Supreme Court has upheld that. It's just a factor, they say. That's okay. Children with very low-level intelligence are held capable of waiving Miranda rights. It's really stacked against them now. In the UK, for example, for more than 20 years, they've had counsel for children and adults at the station house. So they don't have problems with all of these wrongful convictions. They don't have, and then it's apples and oranges. They're not trying children as adults either. We're the only country, because it's contrary to international law, to try children as adults. So we're taking statements from children at the police station without an attorney and bootstrapping based on that statement into adult court. And then we're giving mandatory adult minimum sentences to children. And the whole thing is contrary to the most basic premises of human rights for children.
And also, when you have to pass laws saying that you as a defense attorney have to tell someone that they have to register, that's part of your requirement. It's a state law. That doesn't speak well for our justice system. because there's people that take a plea deal and don't know that they're going to be a lifetime registered.
So, Denise, how do you feel about this? What has been in your experience? I shouldn't say how you feel, but what has been your experience involved with this type of situation? We do have more youth in our prison system, and this sounds like one of the reasons how they get into the system, by not having the proper legal representation.
Well, there was a recent consent decree, I don't know if you're familiar, where the juvenile justice system was sued because they kept incarcerating the youth on violations of probation, and the youth were not getting legal representation, so now it's actually mandated that they are appointed attorneys and they cannot be questioned or anything without legal representation. The youth has the opportunity that if they want to hire or retain a private attorney, they can, but under no circumstance can a youth in Illinois go through the justice system without legal representation.
Well, that's actually that's actually parole. So that it was a class action lawsuit. It was brought against the process of revoking parole. So these are children who are long past trial and who have served their time in prison, out on parole, having parole revoked without a lawyer. So it's only right there. We have a non-waivable right to a lawyer at trial. What I'm saying is that we don't have a right to a lawyer at the first point where you need it the most, when you're being questioned by the police.
Well, the Miranda right, doesn't the Miranda right kick in upon arrest?
Children are advised of their Miranda warnings. The research shows that the majority, in fact, over 96% of children 14 years old don't understand Miranda at all. Children older have a much more difficult time understanding Miranda than adults do. And of course, children are not used to going out and hiring a lawyer like an adult does. So these Miranda rights are, they are Mirandized, and they do routinely waive the Miranda rights, but they are not, that's not adequate for a child. They should have more protections than an adult, not just the same.
Well, and also, and they're also told, after they get Mirandized, they're told, well, if you cooperate, it'll go easier on you. It'll be, I don't know how many times I've heard that. And, you know, and so they may give them a statement, and they do that before they've talked to an attorney, you know, and those kind of things. So there's so many things that are done that shouldn't be done, and some of it's done to make it easier on the public defenders. Like, okay, if I tell him that he's got to, you know, register the rest of his life, is he going to balk at a plea deal, and, you know, I'm going to be here longer, and the judge is going to be here longer, those kind of things. So, and a lot of people don't hear from their public defender till the day of.
Yeah, I totally understand and hear what's being said. I'm just a little confused and not sure, because I know everybody has a different definition for certain terminology that's been used, especially wrongful convictions. When you, if I could just clarify, for example, the definition that you're going by, wrongful conviction, are you talking about people who are actually convicted of crimes for which they're innocent? Or are you expressing more of a concern toward those who have been convicted too harshly?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's innocence in children because children's, as the research and studies from my readings understand, brains do not develop until over 21. So when a child makes a mistake in their life, or comes across an incident that they're not aware of the consequences behind it, that's a level of innocence. When someone is convicted of a crime that they know they didn't commit and they're still wrongfully convicted, that's wrong because they take exculpatory evidence, they hide it, and they do not allow that evidence to be put into court, into the system, to say and to show that this person is actually innocent.
And that's in violation
And
of the
that's
Brady
a
Rule.
violation of, and not only that, it's not only a violation, it's a violation of someone's human rights. It's a violation of their dignity, it's a violation of their character. So now you're telling a child that I am going to be punitively damaged for the rest of my life for a mistake that I made as a child. Should that happen? Because as children, we all make mistakes, and everyone in this room knows that children make mistakes, and we all have made mistakes. The thing is that it didn't come out.
And if I could just clarify again, because it's important to have an understanding of what we're talking about to be able to get at the heart of the issue, and then to be able to draw and support so that there can be action taken in a collaborative effort, because you really do need the mass support of the public to be able to push any kind of reform or change through our legislature.
But there's people that I know personally people that have been in Illinois and other states that have been wrongfully convicted, and I know a gentleman in Missouri that actually testified in Missouri that it was a divorce situation. Mom told the kids to say Dad molested them. They did. Then later on down the road, Mom was diagnosed as schizophrenic. The boy and girl grew up a little bit. They said, Mom told us to say it. This gentleman took all of this documentation, certified documentation, legal, whatever, took it to the governor's office and talked to the governor's people. And they said, well, you probably don't belong on the sex offender registry, but we're not taking you off. And they're not the only state, that will do that when they know somebody's wrongfully convicted.
Well, if I could go back just a little bit with what you said about mistakes, when you talk about children making mistakes, just to clarify the term mistakes, because you have to keep in mind also, mistakes are such that, oh, I put this where it didn't belong and it's in the wrong spot and I made a mistake. But if you're talking about an actual violent crime, if you're talking about committing rape or committing murder or committing, aggravated battery or what have you against an individual and causing that person harm, that's not, in my definition, a mistake. That's an actual act of crime. So are you encompassing all those groups as one under the umbrella, or are you looking at the issue of the withholding of exculpatory evidence and where the prosecutors are actually engaging in corrupt activity and perjured testimony, especially going through the grand jury process, which we all know the ongoing joke is you can indict a ham sandwich, that type of scenario. Because I don't really connect those two as one under the same umbrella. So, are we talking the...
I think the problem here is that we tend to talk in generalities as opposed to, I was an appellate lawyer for 15 years. I read all these appellate records of juveniles and adults, and I have to tell you, there are a million different scenarios for murder. And some are really more self-defense. Some are somebody happened to be standing on the corner when something went down or was in the back seat of a car and didn't know what was going on. And some are very intentional. You cannot generalize. You really have to look at individual
That's why
cases.
I'm saying you don't want to group them all.
I think you have to be very careful to say violent and nonviolent and all this. What we know is that downtown in Chicago, in the juvenile detention center, 99% of those children are children of color. And when we zip code map them, the vast majority come from 5 or 6 zip codes in all of Cook County. And as President Tony Preckwinkle said, this is just wrong. This is just wrong to be so disproportionately impacting a very small segment of our society that tends to come, the people we lock up tend to be poor, they tend to be black and brown, and they tend to live near a prison or a detention center. And that seems to be, and so we really have a broken system. Now, around the world, and I think what we are expressing from different viewpoints is that disenchantment with the justice system. And what's happening around the world is more and more out of that same disenchantment, countries are turning to things like restorative justice, really very indigenous systems of communities solving their problems on an individual way so that you get individual responses and proportionate responses rather than okay, this fits into this category, so we're giving this mandatory minimum, you go away to prison for this. Our prisons are broken. A system that runs over 90% on pleas is broken for victims as well as offenders.
Absolutely.
It's just a broken system.
How do we correct that problem in our society? About the, is that through the, we have to wait till an election comes up and elect judges that are going to be more fair? Or?
Well, you know, in Illinois, I think on a bipartisan basis, people are coming together and they're recognizing this is broken, and they're beginning to make changes to the system so that sentences can be more individualized and more proportionate. Certainly on the juvenile system, we've got things like on juvenile and adult redeploy Illinois, fiscal incentives for judges to look at community alternatives rather than immediately think of incarceration. But we've got a big problem. I've been a lawyer for a number of years, but when I started, we had about 7,000 people in our adult prisons. We've now got 50,000. You look at Germany, they have 6 times our population, and they've got 65,000. And their facilities are humane. They're like group homes. They're not prisons with people in solitary confinement and no programming and class action lawsuits. And we're all paying for it. A lot of money. And so I think we've got to really, on a bipartisan basis, Congress just bipartisan came out with a new set of, a new sentencing act that would do away with a bunch of mandatory minimums, would do away with solitary for juveniles. I think on a bipartisan basis, our country is changing.
Does that does that include people on the registry or adjudicated for sexual offenses? Because usually that's the ones they leave out.
Good question, yeah.
But the nationwide, and I can speak nationwide, there's 843,260 men, women, and children on the registry. And that's according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited. Children as young as 8 and 10 years old that are registrants.
And I can mention another viewpoint. I was contacted by a mom who her daughter was a victim of rape, and the offender, I don't think he got really any jail time, and he was really charged to a reduction of battery. So even though it was, you know, a sexual violent crime, he avoided the sex offender registry entirely. And so now she's on a crusade to change the Illinois law to ensure that if you are charged with battery, but the offense was a sexual violent offense, that you're still going to have to require. So you've got all these moving parts, and that's why I say, and it is important to know how you're defining certain offenses and injustices, because you're going to have the opposition. And, you know, I know it's not all black and white and cookie cutter. Believe you me, I represent all victims of all violent crime. It doesn't matter gender, race, none of that, or what actual victimization. But I do know that when it comes to certain types of offenses being committed, like you're talking the drug offenses, the mandatory minimums, I think those are absolutely ridiculous and outrageous. And I am glad to see that we are moving forward in undoing all that damage and harm, because it doesn't make sense, those mandatory minimums related to those offenses, because you actually have people who are committing rapes against children serving way less time than somebody who had X amount of, you know, crack cocaine. So, you know, these are the values, I think, that represent the mass of the people. We all want our children protected. We all want a voice in the system. We all want representation. We all want to be treated fairly and justly. We all want to ensure that, you know, we're not being discriminated against or being underprivileged, because we should all be equal in the eyes of the court and the law. But that's not how it plays out. But I think also, too, working, you know, together simultaneously to understand that while you're working in one area to undo a registry, you do have people out there who are pushing to ensure that the loopholes where those who are avoiding registration get put on.
Well, we are, I mean, two of our aspects is, of course, that, you know, when you talk restorative justice, that's offered in a lot of scenarios, but not in sexual offense scenarios. And the objective, as I read it a long time ago, is to restore the victim, to restore the perpetrator, and to restore the community. And we're not doing any of that successfully.
And that's really the discretion of the victim, because with that program, it would put a victim and his or her offender in the same room. And in all honesty, I would not, under any circumstance, ever want to be put in the room of the rapist of my child, because I don't want to know what I would do. I don't want to entertain that thought. I would rather just be done. I went through the system, punishment was fulfilled, he served his time, move forward. To ask us to, you know, sit face to face for your benefit, we've already done the sacrifice. We've already gone through the system. We've already took our beating by the prosecutors, you know, by the injustice of it all, because we don't come out unscathed either. Just like the offender has to bear the burden of the consequences of his actions, we unfortunately have to pay a much higher price of being put through a system that does not respect us or treat us respectfully, and actually just pushes, you know, the case through.
But we as the family members of someone that's on the registry, and we have wives that apply for jobs, and they run a background check on them. They got a clean background. Their husband comes up that he's on the registry. Boom, they don't get the job. We have kids that get passed over for higher education opportunities because mom or dad's on the registry. You know, why? That's not fair to them. They got, with the residency restrictions, the kids can't have their dad or mom, whichever, at ball games, at school functions, at playgrounds. And now some states are starting to open up what they call pocket parks. And it's intentional. And they open up these parks in their subdivision, and it's not a full-blown, you know, city park or whatever, but it's designed to keep sex offenders out, to keep them out of that parameter. Okay, so if you don't want people to live where they need to live to successfully rehabilitate and to, you know, function, then academics will say, and they've documented a lot of this, that it will drive people to recidivism, because you're taking them, when you do residency restrictions, you're taking them away from treatment, you're taking them away from families a lot of times where they can't get the support they need. And we're talking about, you know, we're talking about all kinds of offenses. We're talking about half of the people on the registry are juvenile and juvenile. Okay, and it breaks down to ages, you know, below like 12 and under, and then 11 and 17, and then 18 to 26 or whatever. So it's the majority, the vast majority is young people.
Aren't they
And we're ruining their lives.
confidential? Aren't juvenile records
In some states.
prohibited from being disclosed to the public?
In some states,
In
yeah.
some states.
Are you
in
saying in the
some
state of Illinois,
instances.
juvenile records are not being protected?
Assuming they're charged as a juvenile, not as an adult, of course.
Exactly.
You've got that. I want to get back to your point, though, because I think it's a really valid one, that I don't think these registries are really meeting the needs of victims. And I think we see that with the publicity that's going on now about sexual assaults on college campuses, university campuses, and concern about that. And the reason universities don't refer to the law enforcement authorities is because they know that these responses are so disproportionate to the charges. They can't guarantee that they are you know, protecting and not referring these offenses, which is not what a victims advocacy organization wants, of course. So I think when we do see the laws get so out of proportion to the offense and so lacking individual consideration, then you see this kind of wholesale backing away and just not prosecuting. And that's not a good system.
And I'm not for the registry. You might be a little surprised to hear that because I personally, if I could have my way, if I were queen, I would make sure that they serve the maximum amount of prison time. I think the registry is a slap on the wrist. I think it's an out. I think that when they are cut a plea deal and all they have to do is do the registry, it's a way of saying, okay, well, at least we punished him that way. But that doesn't satisfy me. That doesn't satisfy my daughter. What we would rather see as the actual victim is him in prison, away from the population. On a registry, he's still in the public, in the community, at a risk, and he's out there. So I personally think the registry is why we have such minimal time for these types of offenders, because they do think it is a form of punishment.
But you don't think, and I've heard some law enforcement say that they overcharge because they know it's going to be, 95% to 97% is going to be pled down, so they overcharge. Do you believe that?
Well,
in some cases?
the 7 charges against him, they were not overcharges
Well,
because they all
about
actually
one
happened.
person. Yeah.
They ended up only prosecuting 1 class act. So there were 2 class acts, and then there were 5 other felony offenses. And so they just charged the 1 class act. So yeah, it did get whittled down, and it only ultimately on the 1 class act, and on that class act was a 7.5-year term out of what could have been 30.
Well, and I'm, it's unfortunate what your family went through, and a lot of families, go through that. And I'm not minimizing it at all, and we don't dismiss violent crimes,
No,
not at all.
not at all.
We do think it's over the top to put people in prison for a first-time offense for a non-contact, non-violent crime, and it happens every day.
Oh, and I agree with that fully.
Well, but, so there should be, some options, because a lot of kids, like there's a group in Florida that tells, speak up, say something. But some of these people, I've had a couple of teachers say, kids don't want their dad to go to prison. They don't want to break their family up. They just want it to stop. And so I've heard academics say too that we've got to teach kids, we have to teach parents first to start that dialogue with their kids. Begin the dialogue, maintain the dialogue, and make sure that you have that dialogue going to teach them about their sexuality. And I don't think it was Jill Levinson, but it was one of the academics said until that happens, we're going to be up against this all the time. That dialogue has to be maintained.
Yeah, it's an epidemic,
Yeah.
and I think what's really healthy and productive about this conversation, and again, why Dr. Brooks, he really is the king of diversity here in Lake County, is that we do need to start exposing the injustices. And I do agree with the disparities. I don't know if you're familiar with the case in Pennsylvania where the courts, the cash for kids. So we all know that there is a terrible injustice where people are used as commodities. And wherever you see evidence of a child being used as a commodity, it is definitely all of our responsibility to step up and speak out and make sure that that child is vindicated, because under no circumstances should anyone, like for chewing bubble gum. I mean, there were issues where somebody chewed bubble gum and was put in the jail and committed suicide.
Oh, boy.
So, we do have to make sure we are protecting those who go through this process, because what people need to understand is that it's a money-making machine. It is a cash cow, this court system we have. And the whole case process, even from the arrest to the release with the probation and all of that, this is how they're funded, with the fines, fees, and penalties. All of this is also very political, having worked to pass 2 laws and now working on the 3rd. Believe you me, my greatest opponents are victim advocate groups. Victim advocates oppose me on my work, the Jasmine's Law sign-off sheet, and now the attorneys. The people who supported me was the recidivism groups. People who are actually working to prevent the re-victimization and re-offenses of violent crime. So I'm fully supportive of efforts that focus on that, because it's ironic who your allies really are. And I thought that the defense attorney was the actual enemy. And it turns out it's because of his disclosure to me about the plea deal that I had two legs to stand on and was able to oppose it, which the judge agreed with me. Had it not been for that defense attorney, the rapist would have got the minimum. So it wasn't the prosecutor who was my ally. And these are things you learn, Dr. Brooks, and that's why this is so important to raise awareness.
Well, thank you very much for raising me to king of diversity. I guess you can look at this panel and see that we do have a well-diverse group. You know? But I would like Veronica to tell us that we've been talking about how your organization has grown, and we talk about the population of it. You have a special event coming up, I guess it's tomorrow.
Yes.
October 8th, too bad we didn't have this program earlier to promulgate the information. But tell us about the program that you're having tomorrow.
The event tomorrow is going to be surrounded by information, awareness, just as Vicky had mentioned, to make families and have that dialogue. And we will not create awareness until we have that dialogue. And that dialogue has to first start with those of us who are concerned, as Denise is, as Vicky is, as Betsy is, and we all come together with one common interest to make it better. And we have to start somewhere. And until we start that dialogue, nothing will get accomplished, nothing will get achieved, and we'll continue to spiral down to diminish our future, because we're talking about our future here. And so as she was saying that she's not an advocate of the registry, I'm not minimalizing anybody who creates a violent crime against anybody or any individual. And yes, I believe that the sentencing and accountability should be there. But when we punitively, punitively, you know, sanction these laws on young people so that they cannot have a future, that's outrageous. That is discriminatory, because you have to say this war on crime started in the 80s. It started way back with the case, I don't know if anyone is aware of it, the Willie Bosket case in New York, where Governor Cuomo said he's going to get tough on crime. Okay, that spiraled into a concern. It became political. Instead of it becoming fair, it became political. Now we're on a downswing now to say, oh, they made a oops. So now they have to go back and reconstruct and restructure the judicial system so where it is not disproportionate to where it is fair. So we're coming now together to say we have a voice as mothers to speak up and speak out against these disproportionate numbers, these high rates of incarceration to our youth, not only black, yellow, white, or whoever it is, but it is an injustice, and we have to do something about it. So to create an awareness, education, and to have programs that will create and help these families as well as young people know that, hey, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. So how do we avoid it? Well, we avoid it by, as President Obama has stated in his address, we have to stop a pipeline to prison and a pathway to education. So how do we do that? We have to start somewhere. We have to put the funding where it belongs and not into the prison.
Well, tell us some more specifics about the 8th. But you're going to have panel discussions like you mentioned here?
Yes, we will. Vicky is going to be addressing her issues. Betsy is going to be addressing her issues.
Is there a fee to attend?
Yes, there is a $15 door fee, and students must show IDs. It's going to be at the Greenbelt Cultural Center, and we're going to have another advocate group there. Prison Ministries of Illinois will be there as well, because you know you put the kids into the juvenile system, you put them into the prison, and prison ministries come along and try to help them with their beliefs. Well, okay, where do you go from here? Where do we go from here? Let your innocence be known, not silenced. So this is where we're going. This is a initiative, a coalition that's on the move, and hopefully it will gain the necessary awareness that it needs, and it's way overdue. It's way overdue. So.
Okay, Vicky, you think there'll be a challenge for you in talking about your program?
Do I think there'll be a challenge?
Yeah.
There always is. You know.
About the registry.
Yes, yes, there is. I mean, when legislators see our banner when they walk down the halls from all over the United States, and they'll look and they'll go, "Women Against Registry." Attorneys do the same thing. It's like, how can that be? Well, You know, you have to understand who we are and what we go through. So, yeah, there's always opposition because people think that they need that registry, just in case.
Well, we want to remind our audience that, well, it's over by the time this airs, but October 8th, and you do have a forum, there'll be a forum, at the Greenbelt Culture Center in North Chicago, Illinois.
Yes.
As a fee, of course, there's always a fee because you're bringing people in from outside the county here to speak and so forth, you know. But the most challenging experience that you've had with your organization?
The most challenging is for people to speak up. And when you talk about this issue evolving around victims of sex crimes or victims of violent crimes, people tend to want to go within themselves. They don't want to speak up about it because they don't want to bring about the pain or the hurt anymore, and that's understandable. But the thing is that you got to get them into a place where they become comfortable and not ashamed and not afraid. And Martin Luther King says is that when you become silent about the very things that are important, then you make yourself a victim all over again. So and to not say anything and to not speak up about it, what is that saying to us about our country and what we stand for? You know, we're supposed to be the leading country, but when we minimalize what fairness is, what are we saying?
So we're actually leaders here, but we have so much apathy. So how do we get rid of the apathy, especially when it's affecting our kids, the growing population in our prison system, but yet still we don't speak up?
Well, we're known as the incarceration nation.
Okay.
Because we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated.
Wow.
We've carried that banner for a while.
And the problem is, Dr. Brooks, what you have to realize and what everybody needs to realize is that somebody's making money from this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody's benefiting. The way to actually address the problem is find out who's benefiting, and then you go after that source. I know that in the area where I practice with the crime victims, it's the victim advocates who are benefiting with all the funding, and that's why we as the crime victims really have no access to justice, no legal representation, because they're getting all the funding to basically fill out paperwork, which does absolutely nothing for us in the system. So when you start following the money trail and you start to actually advocate for good public policy to make things fair and equal, then you find your opposition is actually from those who are benefiting from the very issue that you're fighting against.
Like GeoCorp is the private prison industry. And when you sign a contract with them, you have to guarantee that you'll keep the beds 90% full.
Right.
But I think some states are really turning this around. For example, New York, you mentioned before, passed all these, Rockefeller drug laws, and they filled up their prisons. And in Illinois, our prisons are downstate. In New York, they're upstate. And bit by bit, they've been closing massive numbers of juvenile and adult prisons in New York. And what the governor's been doing for these towns is setting aside a pot of money to help them reconvert these prisons into more productive and profitable enterprises, and it's really working. And across the country, we've closed more than 50 juvenile prisons since 2007. Massachusetts closed all of their juvenile prisons years ago, and they have one of the lowest crime rates in the nation. They invested that funding in communities, and that's what you have to do. Make sure you invest in communities, and you're just much better off. And all the research shows that the other countries are right, that if you put your funding in social welfare and schools and housing and health care and in jobs, you're going to have much safer societies in the long run. If you put all your money in prisons, it's another matter.
What about the costs, Denise? Is the cost for one inmate in the prison system is in state of Illinois, it's about $50,000 a year.
I think it's isn't like the jail 28,000 or then
The jail?
35,000.
Like juvenile, like the girls' prison, it's
Yeah.
over 200,000 per bed.
Yeah.
And
Per bed?
And the juvenile,
year?
the boys, are over 100,000 per bed.
Wait a minute, per year, per bed.
Per year, per bed, per year. And the juvenile prisons are under another class action lawsuit before not providing full day education, not providing mental health services, and not keeping the children safe, harsh disciplinary. So we'd be better off.
And
you know,
that's the
doing
other area,
anything
mental
else
health.
with that.
We have got to start reforming our system to really take a focus on treating mental health appropriately, because we do have a high number of people with mental health issues in the jails who ought not be there.
That's
So I
right.
agree, and I appreciate all your efforts to pull together a public forum to get people out there and at least start to listen to some of the issues so that we can all come together and know that our best interest, Dr. Brooks, is ensuring that things are done fairly and equal so that all people are protected and treated with dignity.
I mentioned that this was a learning experience for your hosts as well as the viewers. And it has been really a learning experience. And so I really, really appreciate this. I give you some last minute words. Co-host Denise Rotheimer, you're founder of Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence, and you've been very, very effective with this group. And we had Vicky Henry, of course, the president and founder of WAR, that's Women Against the Registry, a great learning experience for me and our audience. And Betsy Clark, president and founder of Juvenile Justice Initiative. And I didn't realize this, you've been in the legal profession for how long?
Well, over 30 years in the
Over
legal
30 years.
profession.
So
I've
you,
seen a lot of changes, I say,
well, I hope so.
and trying to turn it back to the way it was when I started really is what
Right.
we're doing now.
The public defender's office, though, do you have a lot of credence in them?
I do. There's some wonderful public defenders. There's some wonderful appellate defenders in this state, really talented. The problem is, if you get your lawyer at trial and you've already been interrogated and signed the statement, and it usually is sign here and you can go home if you're a juvenile, and that's what they do.
That's what they do.
It's way too late, so that's the problem.
And Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions.
Yeah.
And Veronica Williams, you have pulled together a great panel.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate what you've done. Your check will be in the mail.
Meet her at the door.
Yeah.
This has been a great panel, and it's great information that, as we say in the Navy, promulgated to, I've adopted that word since I retired from civil service now, promulgated to our viewers, and we're getting some interesting comments. This show will be aired Kenosha County, Time Warner TV, Cook County, CAN TV, and also Comcast, which has approximately 100,000 viewers here in the Comcast area. So those that are listening can go to drbrooks.tv, drbrooks.tv, and you could, if you're not in the areas that I mentioned, the 3 counties, Kenosha, Cook, and Lake, you can view the program with other programs. So thank you very much, Veronica.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for participating. It was really a wonderful discussion, and hopefully we can have many more.
Just the beginning.
This is only the first.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And thank you for my co-host, Denise Rotheimer, founder, Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence, which you've been very successful. So we want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with 4 exemplary people. Denise Rotheimer, the founder on Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence. Vicky Henry, president and founder, Women Against the Registry. Betsy Clark, president and founder of Juvenile Justice Initiative. And our anchor person, Veronica Williams, CEO of Mothers Against Wrongful Convictions. We want to thank you very much for listening to and viewing another program on Community Forum. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks Sr., your host.